Now we're live. All right. We good? We good. All right. Hello and welcome to misec Jackson. Woo! Tonight we have Luke and his talk, which is, what would you say you do here? But first, the traditional misec Jackson pun of the day. What kind of shorts do clouds wear? Thunderwear.
All right, so you gotta click this button here, the button here, do the thing here,
Mhm.
do that, right?
Yep,
Got
yep.
that, right? Well, that's the wrong one. Who told you to do that? Where's that one? How's that work? Uh-oh. Hi.
Is that going to be good for?
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right, let's roll with it. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Just going to do, I didn't really put a personal introductory slide here, so I'm just going to do quick little bit about myself. I think most everybody in the room is somewhat familiar with me, but for the internet viewers, I'm Luke Gorczyca. I am a OT security engineer focusing on operational technologies. Work for a utility here in Michigan, and so the typical disclaimer: thoughts and opinions are mine, not my employers. I'm not doing this at their behest or on their behalf or anything like that. So I've been in the industry I've been working in OT stuff for about 6 years. 2 of that was IT, 4 is in the security capacity. So why are we here? What am I talking about? So this talk is actually a remake of a talk I did a couple years ago. I wanted to do one on the different job types in cybersecurity, what those jobs entail, what kind of skills you'd need for them, and so on. And so I did a talk a number of years ago, and it was very, very bad. It was poorly researched. I used wrong terminologies. I presented it bad. The whole thing was a nightmare. And so it's like, all right, a little bit ago, I was like, I should do this again, but make it not suck. So that's what this is going to try to be. No guarantees. I'm not an expert on this. Again, I can count my years of experience with my fingers still. So not an expert. This time I tried to do a lot more research. I brought in some smart people that I know and asked them a lot of questions. So this is hopefully going to be a better version of that previous talk. And kind of where this came from, or even initially when I first was going to do this, one of the reasons I wanted to do it is because I've noticed that the different job types in security are not very well known. Even in the industry, we tend to discuss it as just one type of job, cybersecurity. And education is also kind of built that way. It's very generic. It covers a broad variety of topics, which is good and bad from the education standpoint, because you get a good foundation, you learn lots of stuff. But at the same time, you're not necessarily prepared for the specific jobs that exist out there. And cybersecurity is not really a job, it's a field. There's a bunch of different types of jobs in it. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to some of the different fields and, kind of the skills that go with it, and make it a little bit easier for people who might be trying to get into the industry, or people in the industry who want to change jobs to know, what type of skills they might need or what other jobs might be out there. So quick run through of the job types. I kind of broke it down into 6 major categories to keep it simple and, bring things together whenever possible. So the 6 I boiled it down to are incident response, engineering, identity and access management, auditing, compliance, risk management, vulnerability management, and penetration testing. I'm going to get more into these in the following slides, so this is just those at a glance. And so kind of an interesting phenomenon we have is, and my graphic got screwed up, it's supposed to be more blue on the one end, so something with the resolution. But typically we talk about jobs in cybersecurity as this kind of a spectrum of blue to red, defense to attacker, and we put purple in the middle of, when it's kind of the job function is kind of both. And there's a lot of kind of arguing about where things should go, what is considered, what's considered blue, what's considered red, what's considered purple, or some people say everything should be purple. It just kind of makes it hard to figure out where stuff actually lines up in terms of what you're doing. I think all of these have a valid point to them, all these criticisms. So I kind of played around with, and people will agree and disagree, but I kind of played around and came up with my own spectrum. Again, not doing it justice, there was a bit more variety in my original graphic, but kind of this, interconnected web of these things talk to this thing, and how red are they, how blue are they, how purple are they. So in the original graphic, a lot of those all of them had like at least a sliver of red and a sliver of purple. But it's kind of this web of like what feeds into what and what skills overlap and how do these things interact with each other. So I just thought it was a cool little slide to try out. People will disagree. I'm not an expert.
Can you click the bottom right?
Where?
Hover over here. Hover in. Go a little higher. There it is. That one.
Yeah.
Ah! We're experts. We're winging it. We're learning.
All right. So the first one of the different job types we're going to cover is incident response. So kind of what is it? What even is incident response? So I kind of broadly define incident response as similar to how it sounds. You're responding to incidents, but it covers a wide variety of stuff of anything you do in a response monitoring kind of capacity. So, checking alerts, building analysis, looking at bad things that show up, trying to figure out if something is bad or not, building those defenses, threat intel, and the variety of stuff that gets you that information on, is something bad happening? Is it not bad? And what are we going to do about it? That response capacity as well. How are we going to handle the situation when it happens? So the technical skills here are run from like your basic IT skills. It generally, especially with incident response, but it always kind of pays to be familiar with the operating system, the underlying stuff that's going on, how it works, what the services are doing, what normal looks like, and would help you inform you on, is this thing actually bad, or is that a normal behavior I just haven't seen before that's, supposed to happen in this operating system. Then we get into the more like the nitty gritty of incident response. You got your forensics, memory forensics, disk forensics, it can include log analysis, stuff like that. So some of your general tools like volatility and your EDRs, which going into those IR tools and processes, EDRs, familiarity with SIMs is very helpful. The malware reverse engineering tools like Ghidra and IDAPRO, that falls into your malware analysis kind of part of the forensics. Threat hunting, gathering threat intel, boiling it down into useful information, finding out indicators of compromise, and then building those detections. So your detection engineering tools, this goes kind of back to SIM, and then into that automation aspect. So a lot of the automation tools that are out there these days, and scripting also is very useful in that capacity. We're also some of your softer skills in that regard, summarizing complex technical content, being able to take that information and tell it to somebody who isn't on the front lines with incident response and doesn't necessarily know what you're talking about. Communicating effectively within a team. Incident response, you're generally working in a team capacity. You need to be able to communicate with the folks you're working with, pass that information to them, and get information from them, what's going on. And then just your standard writing skills, writing process guides, and other key pieces of information. Pen testing. What is it? Pen testing, as a broad category, kind of falls into the analyzing systems from a more adversarial perspective to see what information you can get where can you get in, where are the vulnerabilities, what exploits are there. And from a cybersecurity, from a job perspective, this is generally going to be on the purpose is to inform the defenders on where their gaps are. You're not just breaking the network for fun. This kind of divides down into subcategories. You've got your application testing, network or general pen testing, hardware, and then physical assessments. I'm only going to cover the first two because hardware and physical are a bit more specialized, and it's not going to be as useful for this kind of a general talk. So this comes with a wide variety of skills that come with it. Static code analysis can be very useful for applications because you're trying to figure out if there's a hole in this application. So static code and then dynamic code analysis debugging are going to come into play. The best coding practices, you're going to want to be familiar with that and probably pick up just some general programming knowledge. You're going to need to know how applications are built, how they work, in order to really get into them to figure out how they're not working and if they're doing what they're not supposed to do. Apply that to cloud as well. Cloud applications are becoming a bigger and bigger thing. So familiarity with cloud, its constraints, how the data is stored, how it works, and what you're going to have. And also on an assignment, what are you going to have access to in the cloud versus not? Because there's your customers stuff that you get to look at, but then there's that back end stuff that you don't have the rights to poke at. The vendor who's hosting their application isn't going to be happy with you if you start breaking their things as well. So you want to learn those constraints. Where's the data stored? When I mess with the cloud, what am I actually doing? Swagger files. I will confess I didn't research that particular piece a lot. That's from, this is a piece of information I got from someone I asked their opinion on this. I actually don't know what Swagger files are. So if anybody knows, feel free to shout it out. APIs and endpoint mapping. You want to figure out how the API of this application works if you're going to be messing with it. And so you want to be familiar with APIs in general. We covered dynamic code analysis, proxying. Proxying is going to be important both for you testing and to understand how it works on the back end for when you're interacting with something that is proxied, because depending on the engagement, you might be on either side of the proxy. There's a whole bunch of tools in the application world. Burp Suite's one of the big ones, and similar tools like that. There's also development tools in the browsers. Most browsers have dev tools, familiarizing with those. And then like mobile apps and how to work with Android packages and open up those. Shifting over to the general / network side of pen testing, one key thing is just understanding user behavior, knowing what people typically do so that you can you can infiltrate that traffic or pretend to be that traffic, imitate it, and hide what you're doing that way to kind of help see if the defenders can figure out if you are legitimate or if you're just a standard user. Packet analysis, messing with stuff with Wireshark, understanding the insides of the network, the ins and outs, what traffic looks like, where can you hide stuff, and what can you get away with, which goes into the protocols. Understanding network protocols is also very critical so that you can figure out what you can break, what you can get into, and recognizing. Sometimes you can recognize vulnerabilities in systems based just on their network traffic. That kind of goes into man in the middle, understanding just the basic concepts of a man in the middle attack, be familiar with how to do that. What typical infrastructure looks like, connections between systems and how they interact, what systems and endpoints, what they do, how they work, kind of back to those basic IT skills of understanding what is this system, what is it doing, what can I break, but also how does it normally behave. And then Active Directory can be a very useful tool as well. They tend to map out networks pretty well, but also just understanding how it works on the back end, what kind of credentials you might want to steal or what vulnerabilities AD typically has. And then finally, soft skills, very similar. I found that from people's recommendations, soft skills are generally the same throughout. Basically, good writing and oral communication skills. You're going to have to be able to take this information that you got from your pen test, turn it into useful information for somebody else, particularly that person might not be super tech savvy. So you have to present it in a way that they'll understand, that's communicated effectively and actually gets the information across. Otherwise, you're not doing anybody any good. Engineering. Engineering is this is another one where I kind of made the category kind of broad because system architecture and architecture design are also kind of fit in here. It's basically anything that's more on the building side from my perspective. So when you're building something, when you're implementing something, whatever you're creating kind of falls into that engineering space. And related to security, you're building or engineering security systems or designing a not, a normal network, but with security in mind. How are we going to fit this all together and make it do what we want? From technical skills perspective, cloud is becoming bigger and bigger. And whether you like it or not, I will raise my hand and admit I do not like cloud. I'm not a fan, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of everything. You're going to have to know cloud in the modern day. Similar thread virtualization, whether it's in the cloud or on premise, you got to understand the core concepts of virtualization. How am I going to build this? Is this system going to be served better in the cloud or, locally virtualized or on a physical box? Understanding Windows operating system, workstation, server is very, very critical for most places. Linux is important too. But it kind of depends on your environment. Some places are going to focus on Windows. Some places are going to have more Linux-based. So that'll kind of depend on which organization you end up in. But so be familiar with both, understand the nuts and bolts of them, and then those server services as well. Like what services do most systems host? How do services work? How do you set them up? Anything you can, just kind of look up the basics and work on that. So that way, whatever job you get into, you're going to at least understand the basic services to set up, and then you can learn on more of the ones that are going to be unique to the organization you're in. Another core concept for understanding engineering is encryption, cryptography, and PKI. Everything now is, for the most part, is going to have some sort of digital certificate, some sort of encryption system to make sure that traffic stays secure, that people aren't eavesdropping on it, and learning how to create the certificates, how to put them into things, how cryptography works in general, how a public key infrastructure system works. It's going to take you a long way. And funny little story with this particular bullet point, this is one of the areas where I really messed up in my last presentation. For some reason, the phrase PKI didn't occur to me when I was writing it, and I just wrote certs on everything. And at the end of the presentation, someone raised their hand. They're like, "Are you talking about like getting certified? Like different organization certifications?" And then I had to wade into the nightmare conversation of whether or not getting certs is actually, is it good or is it bad for your career? And I really didn't want to do that, but I forced myself into it because I didn't use the correct terminology. So, a little funny story there. But continuing on. We've got next part for engineering, networking. These systems you set up are going to talk to each other. You have to figure out those networking concepts, or you might be working on those networking systems themselves, the routers, the switches, firewalls, implementing those rules, VPNs, and setting up those connections may be a core part of your job. And then automation and scripting is becoming a bigger and bigger thing in all areas. Being able to automate some of the more simple tasks so that you can focus on the more important work, the more advanced stuff, taking care of the simple things with automation is becoming more and more critical. Some of the key tools for engineers would be like PowerShell and Python. Finally, MFA, multi-factor authentication, getting introduced in more and more places. So understanding some of those foundations of MFA and how those systems work, and then maybe try getting some experience with different types of multi-factor softwares that are out there and how to integrate them into things. Soft skills, pretty much the same as what I've been talking about. Process guide development, those written skills, those oral communication skills. Generally, you're going to be working in a team, presenting information to people. So that's always a good skill to brush up on. Identity and access management. is, as a broad category, this is having to do with, similar to engineering, but it's working on the side of the authentication credentials that people have. So engineers would set up the system where usernames and passwords are created, stored, that interacts with the machines and gives you access to what you need. IAM is provisioning that access, getting it to the people who need it, and ensuring that they can actually log in, it's working the way it's supposed to, getting them those things they need. So in a MFA scenario, maybe getting them that token, or that making sure they have the app, getting their accounts provisioned, getting them access to what they need. And then maintaining that access, removing it when people leave or when they change jobs. Technical skills on this one, Active Directory or an LDAP. For most places, that's going to most likely be the authentication system you're using. So familiarity with Active Directory, how it works, how to set it up, how to create accounts, and give them access to control access with it. And also any specific IAM tools that are out there. There's a lot of different choices, so it's kind of hard to give you go learn this, because there's a bunch of different tools out there.
Yeah.
Remind me tomorrow. The governance, best practices, and principle of least privilege. You should definitely understand the term principle of least privilege, what that means, and go and learn as much as you can about the best practices. Is a great way to give you that extra leg up in an interview, or improve your job of knowing here's the best practices, here's what we should consider doing. Back to PKI, that ties into a lot of the time you'll have certificates and stuff for individual users or systems that they use that to authenticate. Being familiar with how PKI is set up and how those certificates work is always valid. Single sign-on systems, again, there's a lot of them, so I can't give you a specific one, go learn this, but be familiar with single sign-on, how it works, and what systems are out there. And then, of course, scripting and automation again. And standards, I said this for engineering, but kind of for everything, a lot of the standards are like PowerShell and Python. There's a number of other good scripting languages, but those are some of the ones you're going to come across the most. Vulnerability management. This is one where it's similar to pen testing, but it differs in regards to vulnerability management is about understanding where the vulnerabilities are, which ones you can patch, which ones need to be patched, how are we patching them, how we're mitigating the ones that can't be patched, and just being aware of those vulnerabilities and how we're going to handle them. Penetration testing is more on finding them. Vulnerability management is the whole processes of finding them, knowing what they are, where they are, which ones need to be addressed, which ones have been addressed, and so on. A more management-based system. Technical skills, understanding the OSs and how their patching works, how their vulnerabilities typically work, where that information is coming from, is very, very key. Also similar with applications, especially the well-known ones that most people are going to be using, getting some familiarity with where their patches come from, how are they tracked. Does the vendor send out bulletins? Is it included in things like the National Vulnerability Database? When do they do patches? How do they release them? And so on. Assessment tools, there's a number of them out there, things like, Qualys and trying to think of the Tenables one. There's a free one.
Greenbone?
Yes, it's exactly the one I was thinking of, Greenbone. So there's a number of tools out there. Obviously, especially if you're starting out, you don't have access to the paid ones. There's not a lot, you might not be able to get a lot of experience with Qualys, but you can try out get some free ones, play around with them, get the basics, and then, do some research on the paid versions of stuff and how those work. Also want to understand the concept of alternate measures for vulnerabilities and what you can do about them, the different methods that can be employed other than just patching something, having a kind of an understanding of that process and the different options available helps in this field to work out in the situations where you can't patch, because patching isn't always a simple process of, patch comes out, install it, download it, restart the machine, especially when you're dealing with 99.9999% uptime. requirements. And then finally, some of the terminology and locations where information about vulnerabilities is stored, like understanding what a CVE is, what the NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, is, and the various locations where vulnerability data is stored, what types of vulnerabilities are listed, and who keeps track of them. Soft skills, same kind of stuff, writing a lot of reports, presenting it to people who don't fully understand what even an exploit is or what vulnerabilities are and what you're dealing with, giving them information on here's the risk, here's how this impacts us, and then communicating those complex technical requirements, whether in written or spoken form. And then the last one is risk auditing compliance. I kind of combine these into one because they're very similar. They just deal with the different aspects of it. So auditing is the side of making sure that things are compliant and understanding what the risks are. Finding, similar to vulnerability management, finding out where the problems are, but also what the policies are. Is the system working? Do you have security technologies in place? Are you living up to the expectations you set for yourself or some other governing body has set for yourself? Compliance is on the opposite side of that, where you're getting that information from the auditor of like, here's what you need to fix, or here's what is working, and taking that information and applying it to make sure you do have all those requirements in place. And also, even before the auditors come, checking out your own systems, making sure, do we have our ducks in a row? Do we have the information we need? Is it set up the way it's supposed to be? And then risk plays into that, as well as risk management of knowing what risks you have to your business and what you're planning to do about them. Do you have them all recorded? Are you keeping track of them? Do you know what you're planning to do to fix them? Are you accepting that risk? Are you planning to mitigate the risk? Just understanding what your risks are and what the current status of them is. These have, the technical skills that kind of overlap with a number of others. So again, basic understanding of the operating systems, networks, patches, vulnerabilities is going to do a lot in this, because you have to understand what those risks are and what that means for your company. So understanding the basics of vulnerability management as well, security architecture, what does a good design system look like? What does a poor design look like? And understanding how those things interact so that you can gauge yourself against, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? Understanding those security best practices, that goes a lot into, that covers a lot of the basics of most compliance requirements, most regulations, and most standards that you're going to be comparing yourself to or comparing someone else to. And then the ability to identify what are the critical pieces of infrastructure, the critical systems, and the critical data. Because that really plays a lot into, are you being compliant? Is the critical stuff being covered, or are these people not being compliant? Do they have critical information that's open? And what is critical? So what makes that a higher or lower risk? If this is a critical system, the risk is higher, versus a less critical system. There's still a risk, but it's going to be a lot lower. We might manage that a different way. Soft skills, this is one of the ones that relies a little bit more on those soft skills as well. Obviously, communication and those abilities to talk about complex technical things to non-tech people, but also knowledge of the regulations and standards. There's a bunch of different ones. So depending on what field you're going into is going to dictate what regulations, what standards you're going to be dealing with. So if you have an idea of what industry you're looking to get into, or that you're currently in and you're looking to expand your role, look up what standards and regulations apply to those specific types of organizations, or go with some of the basic ones. Like NIST is a great place to start. NIST has a lot of standards that apply broadly, and those are a good set of standards to get familiar with. The ability to relate technologies to policies, so understanding, what does this policy wants us to do this, how does that relate to technology, and vice versa. And then, which ties into tailoring those security requirements to the business or compliance objectives. Just because we might feel good about, we want to implement this new technology, is that actually doing anything for our business goals or meeting compliance, or are we just doing it to do it? Obviously, it'd be great if we could implement every technology we want, but in worlds with budgets, you have to be choosy. And so we want to tailor it to our needs. what the business's needs are, what are our compliance requirements, what do we actually have to do. So that ability to understand those things and tailor your response to it is very important. And then ability to calculate risk given on the criteria. So this can be also internal and external criteria. A governing body might have, identify your high risk data based on what we think is the stuff that needs to be protected. And you have to be able to take that and apply it to your information and see what they're talking about. At the same time, your own standards, how are we going to calculate our risk based on our goals, our needs, and our concerns. And just kind of a quick thing to review based on what we just went through. I noticed a common threads among a number of those, and I kind of talked about it as I went through the presentation. But there's some technical skills and soft skills that apply very broadly and are probably a good place to start for sure. General operating system knowledge, get familiar with Windows, Linux, Mac even, understand the nuts and bolts of it. How does it work under the hood as much as you can, and just get familiar with it beyond that of a normal user. Scripting and automation is becoming more and more prevalent. It's very important. PowerShell, Python, and there's a number of other good scripting languages that are coming out. So familiarity with those will get you a long way. Active Directory, most cases, most businesses are going to use Active Directory to some capacity. So having familiarity with that is very useful. And then your basic networking skills, understanding how stuff traverses in the network, what the packets look like, what the information looks like, and how to set that up is also a very valuable skill. And then as for soft skills, standards across the board have been communication skills, written and oral, communicating with teams, being able to write out what you've seen, what you're doing, what you're working on, and the ability to explain those technical details to non-technical people is very critical in most jobs, and written and oral skills. And then some pieces of advice that I kind of just came up with is, especially for people who are newer into the industry, is take advantage of all the free resources you can find. I didn't list a lot of them here because I covered a broad number of topics and I'm kind of lazy and I didn't want to put a whole library's worth of stuff in here. So, but there's tons and tons of free resources. There's things that, places for coding, learning, analysis, network forensics, memory forensics, malware forensics, networking, basic IT skills, all this stuff is, coding, scripting. There's tons and tons of free resources out there. So take advantage of as many of those as you can and keep learning. Learn as much as you can. Learn about anything that interests you, things that are important to the job type you want to get. And talk to people in the industry. MISec, a little shameless plug for the group here. MISec is a great opportunity to meet people from different skill sets, different types of jobs, and learn from them as much as you can. Job shadow if you can. This is particularly important because a lot of the time a job might sound fun and exciting, and then you go watch somebody do it and it's like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. I don't think I'd actually like doing that. But then you haven't committed to it yet. You can learn that before you get in there. Likewise, there might be a job that sounds like not something you'd want to do, sounds awful, and then you watch someone doing, oh, this is actually kind of fun. I didn't know that you approached it this way. So job shadowing is a great opportunity if you can do it. And finally, don't overlook IT jobs. If you're wanting to get into cybersecurity, but there's IT jobs available now, go for it. It's a great learning experience. You learn a lot about those basic skills, that core understanding of the operating system, of the basic technologies, networking, scripting, automation, programming. A lot of those can come from IT jobs. So they're great opportunities, and you can always move into cybersecurity later. So don't overlook IT jobs. If you can get cybersecurity job right out of the gate, awesome, go for it. But if an IT job comes along first, give it a shot. You'll learn a lot of stuff and get some job experience that'll help you move forward in your career. So that's all I had. Open to questions, comments, concerns, quandaries, quagmires, queries. If anybody has any. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
Earlier, you mentioned that you work in OT engineering from a security perspective. What is a broad difference between, say, enterprise security engineering and OT security engineering?
Sure. So let's see. The short and kind of humorous answer is in OT technology, stuff breaks a lot more easily, and you're not allowed to touch things. But an actual definition is operational technology is the side of things where there's part of like industrial control systems and SCADA systems of where the cyber world meets the physical world. So these technologies are interpreting digital commands and converting them to things that are actually happening, running like manufacturing plants, robots, SCADA systems, power generation, pumps, valves, all that kind of stuff. And it takes a different approach because these technologies don't change as rapidly. So you have to figure out how to take old stuff and make it talk to the new stuff. How do you deal with lingering vulnerabilities and stuff like that, and the different needs of the business, because they can't handle very much downtime at all. They don't like you messing with their stuff, but it's also fun and exciting because you get to work with cool technologies that you don't normally interact with, like HMIs, PLCs, RTUs, SCADA systems, fun stuff like that.
What's an RTU?
RTUs are remote terminal units. It's kind of like a modem. It translates data and communicates it long distance to a head-end system that gathers all that data. PLCs are programmable logic controllers. They take human-readable, semi-human readable digital stuff and translate it into an electrical signal to make something do something. So it makes a robotic arm move, makes valves open and close, and so on. Yes, sir.
If you were going to pick a different heading from the 6 that you presented to move into at a later stage of your career, what sounds the most interesting to you right now?
If I were to switch ones, probably incident response. It's always been kind of a secondary passion of mine anyway. I like messing around with like PCAPs. I love looking into PCAPs. I've done memory forensic stuff before. And I've always been fascinated with the concept of stopping the bad guys. So probably incident response would be if I were going to switch. Any other questions? All right. Thanks, everyone. This one?
That's just your face.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exit that full screen. All right.